Good morning. Good morning, dear colleagues, somewhere on the European continent. Good afternoon and good evening to our participants on other continents. Welcome at this very important event. 3 days of discussion and exchange during which we would like to explore the way forward with regard to inclusive education and how to provide educational opportunities to all so that persons with a disability are correctly included, not only in their educational life, but also later on in life. I'm Luc Zelderlo, Secretary General of ESPD. And at this moment, more and more people are joining us. So we take a sort of a slow start, but nevertheless, welcome to all of you. And I would like now to hand over for practical information and also for, I'm sure, for setting the scene a bit for our 3 days event to my colleague Rachel, who is our moderator and timekeeper for the coming 3 days. Rachel, please, you have the floor and all our attention. To all participants, enjoy the conference. Again, welcome.
Thank you
Rachel,
very
please.
much. Thank you very much, Luc. And as moderator of the conference and coordinator of the Beyond project, I'd like to welcome all of you to the Inclusive Education and Beyond conference. If you'd like to know more about the Beyond project, you can visit the ESPD project page and the sponsor page on the conference platform. As Luc said, I will start with some technical information. So simultaneous interpretation in Portuguese and Spanish is provided. You can activate this interpretation by clicking the interpretation button on the control bar and then choosing your language. Please click mute the original audio to ensure that you can hear the interpreter clearly. Some of the speakers in the session will speak in Portuguese. So if you don't speak Portuguese, you will need to use interpretation in these sessions. Speech to text captioning is also available. To activate the captions, please click on the live transcript button on the bottom of the screen. Please note that the captions can be moved around the screen by clicking and dragging them to where you would like them to go. We always want to hear from you, so please share your comments in the chat box. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button on the control bar on the bottom of the screen. We'd also like you to explore ESPD's new conference platform, www.espdconferences.com, via which hopefully you have accessed this panel already. You can find links to all the panel sessions and the workshops via the agenda. You can also find further information about the speakers and related documents on each session page, which is in the agenda. It's also possible to video call and chat with other participants. So we encourage you to find your friends and your colleagues from across the world in the attendance list and reach out to them and give them a call. And although we can't be together in Lisbon, we hope that via this conference, you'll have the opportunity to connect with others and enjoy reconnecting with each other. So we know that we have people joining from all over the world and we have a diverse number of participants, but we'd like to know a little bit more about where you're joining us from and what you do. So we'd just like to ask you a few questions via the poll that should be popping up on your screens now. So first of all, we'd like to know where you're joining us from. If I just give you sort of a few moments to vote on that. And I'll just repeat that there is simultaneous interpretation in Portuguese and Spanish. And you can activate that interpretation by clicking the interpretation button on the control bar and choosing your language. I'll also note that there is speech to text captioning. You can activate this captioning by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of the control bar. And then you can move those that captioning to wherever you want in your screen by clicking and dragging it to the desired destination. So I don't know if we can then move on to the second poll, seeing now lots of people from Europe. maybe with the time zone, it's too early for everybody else. And then moving on, we'd just like to know who you are and what you do. So if we can launch the second poll.
They answer to both questions at the same time.
Okay, nice to see. So we have some people who are education professionals, social service providers, and also representatives of civil society organizations. So thank you very much for joining us. And I hope that over the next few days, together we can explore how to move from inclusive education and beyond. And so with that, I would like to hand over to ECD President Jim Crow for some welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Rachel. Bom dia, receba. I would like you, dear delegates, to join with me. For many centuries, Portuguese explorers traveled the world, identifying countries, bringing their language across the world. I would like you to join with me in being transported now to the sunlit city of Lisbon. No need for crowded departure lounges in airports. No need to search for your suitcase or your luggage, or to fill your luggage before you left. No need to use public transport. Be transported direct with me to the City of Light in Lisbon, the beautiful city of Lisbon. We hope delegates have already received a welcome package to give you a taste of Portugal. I'm sure there will be more of that later. But I am really privileged to be on this journey with you. As Luke and Rachel said, this is a conference to look at inclusive education. How can we take it forward? And remember, folks, this is not a new idea. Hopefully, this is an idea, an approach to life whose time is now coming. Back in 1994, we had the Statement of Salamanca. And that statement, amongst its many sentences and phrases, stressed that schools should include all children, regardless of individual differences or difficulties, and adopt as a matter of law and policy the principle of inclusive education. So no complex words, no complex constructions in that phrase. A very clear statement of ambition. Very much filled out and supplemented by the UN CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Disabled Persons, and Article 24 of that convention that commits states parties to recognize the right of persons with disabilities to education, with a view to realizing this right without discrimination and on the basis of equal opportunity. States parties shall ensure an inclusive education system at all levels and at lifelong learning. So that challenge was set over 2 decades ago for us. At our conference today and tomorrow, and at the associated meetings, which I hope you will take part in fully and enjoy, we shall be identifying the key challenges and opportunities for inclusion that exist. We shall be bringing together experience from across Europe and beyond. And I trust we will have the opportunity to renew old acquaintances, make new friends, and make new professional colleagues to take forward this hugely important task if children with disabilities are to enjoy the proper advantages that they should enjoy as citizens of the world. It is not only in being transported to Lisbon, do we come to the sunshine, the beautiful music that we heard in the introduction, to the raising of our humours that comes with being in such a setting? But it is very fitting we are in Portugal. Portugal has been at the forefront of inclusive practice in education, and its statistics in terms of inclusion of children and young people with disabilities are profoundly encouraging, profoundly strong. So I would like again to thank our sponsors who helped in making this conference possible, but also our partners, the Beyond Project, and of course, CECD, Mira Sintra. And I would like to pass over to my colleague before we welcome the Secretary of State for Education in Portugal, my dear colleague and board colleague, Miguel Valles. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you so much, Jim. Welcome to Lisboa. It's a pleasure to receive you here all. I wish I could see you all here in Lisbon. First, because it meant that COVID was finally over and we could enjoy the presence of each other. And secondly, because you could enjoy this beautiful weather we are experiencing, taste our great food, and most important, to improve your selfies portfolio with these fantastic views from Lisbon. So a missed opportunity right there. So from Lisbon to Europe and beyond, I welcome you all. And since I have this rare opportunity to speak in Portuguese in such an international event, I will use this privilege. And since English is not my mother language, as you probably noticed, I will use I'm not sure if I'll get an opportunity in my lifetime, so I will use my Portuguese language. Muito bom dia a todos. É prazer receber e ver aqui tantos parceiros portugueses. Em nome do Centro de Educação para o Cidadão com Deficiência, o CSD Mira Sintra, quero agradecer aqui o trabalho da ESPD na promoção deste evento e no apoio em todos os passos para que este evento se tornasse uma realidade. Não conseguiríamos fazer este evento com esta abrangência e envolvendo tantas pessoas por todo o mundo sem o apoio da ESPD. Obrigado. Então, porquê Lisboa? Porquê educação? Primeiro, porque Portugal tem hoje a presidência do Conselho da União Europeia. Esta semana, no Porto, está a decorrer a Cimeira Social sobre o plano de ação dos pilares sociais europeus para os próximos 10 anos. Uma reunião muito importante que está a decorrer no Porto esta semana mesmo. Por isso, temos alguma competição aqui no envolvimento destas discussões. Portugal, desde o início, como o Jim aqui disse, tem visto a Convenção sobre os Direitos das Pessoas com Deficiência das Nações Unidas de uma forma muito própria em relação aos seus parceiros europeus. Portugal, desde 2008, iniciou um processo que foi na altura considerado revolucionário de transformação de todas as escolas de educação especial em centros de recursos para a inclusão, para o apoio às escolas regulares, às escolas locais, e esse processo decorre exatamente porque um ano depois Portugal assina a Convenção sobre os Direitos das Pessoas com Deficiência, tal como o seu protocolo opcional. Ora, esta assinatura trouxe uma responsabilidade acrescida, porque a Convenção não é um documento opcional, é law-abiding document, é um documento com implicações legais, e Portugal podia ter escolhido alguns caminhos, escolheu o de transformação das nossas organizações, todo o trabalho que foi feito no apoio de crianças com deficiência, para colocar à disponibilidade de todas as escolas públicas. Por isso, na altura foi visto como um processo muito revolucionário, e isto permitiu que as organizações também de apoio a pessoas com deficiência entrassem no meio da escola e conseguissem, de forma progressiva, transformar a escola para tornar a escola mais inclusiva e que não deixasse ninguém para trás. Esta experiência foi muito enriquecedora para ambas as realidades, para as escolas de educação especial na altura e para as escolas públicas, e permitiu darmos um passo de qualidade ao nível da inclusão de todos os alunos. Aqui Portugal providenciou recursos que não estavam habitualmente disponíveis nas escolas, tal como terapeutas, psicólogos, assistentes sociais, um conjunto de profissionais que poderiam ajudar a escola na procura de um modelo de educação mais inclusivo, e este trabalho foi continuado até que em 2018 temos mais uma revolução, que é a eliminação de uma lei específica para alunos com deficiência. Em 2018 foi outro momento importante na vida, na prática educativa em Portugal, uma vez que se reviu todo o documento educativo, toda a lei educativa, para tornar todos os programas educativos como inclusivos, como integrando toda a gente. Deixámos de ter um diploma específico para alunos com deficiência. Aliás, esse termo caiu como alunos com necessidades educativas especiais, porque se viu que em qualquer momento da nossa vida académica temos necessidades educativas especiais, temos necessidade de um apoio adicional. Por isso, a parte da medicalização da educação caiu. Hoje, em Portugal, já não é preciso diagnosticar uma criança para que ela tenha apoio, e o apoio deve ser providenciado na altura certa. Deve ser providenciado na altura certa e deve ser também abandonado na altura certa. Ou seja, não é por uma criança com deficiência que necessite de apoio que o tenha, independentemente daquele apoio começar a influenciar na sua própria vida. Ou seja, aqui os apoios têm de ser feitos à medida do aluno e de forma a que não colidam com as interações espontâneas que essa criança possa ter com os seus colegas, na formação de amizades, na formação de soft skills, daquelas competências que são importantes para o futuro, e por isso a presença destes técnicos, deste apoio nas escolas, permitiu não só providenciar o apoio, mas também detectar quando é que esse apoio podia começar a prejudicar a vida desse aluno. Ou seja, mais apoio não é sempre melhor. Pelo facto de uma criança ter um assistente pessoal, um adulto ao seu lado, às vezes esse adulto inibe que colegas se aproximem dessa criança, que ela estabeleça relações espontâneas, que tenha aquelas amizades que todos nós temos passado do sistema educativo, não é? É uma coisa que é universal. Todos nós passamos por esse sistema, todos nós fizemos amigos e que ainda perduram esse tempo e essas amizades, e por isso é um tempo precioso que não pode ser prejudicado com qualquer outra agenda, que não o bem-estar, o estabelecimento de relações para a vida e competências que se prolonguem para sempre. Nós acho que conseguimos identificar aqui dois grupos diferentes, talvez, de pessoas que estão aqui connosco. Aquelas que estão apaixonadas pela educação porque foram excelentes, foram alunos brilhantes, estabeleceram relações importantíssimas que ainda hoje valorizam e têm saudades desse tempo. Por isso, pessoas que foram muito felizes no sistema educativo. E temos outro grupo, talvez, de pessoas que foi um sacrifício passarem pelo sistema educativo. Foi contra a natura, um desafio, não estavam motivados, onde eu me incluo claramente neste grupo. Por isso, o que vimos, porque nós todos passamos por este sistema, é que muitos colegas nossos, que nós até na altura considerávamos brilhantes, com competências fantásticas, falharam. E o sistema educativo falhou para alguns alunos. Por isso, todos nós somos apaixonados pela educação, talvez por razões diferentes. E é essa confluência de sentimentos sobre o que nós temos na educação, porque regressamos à nossa infância, quando muitas vezes falamos de educação e projetamos a nossa vida nas decisões que foram tomadas há tantos anos, enquanto ainda estávamos no sistema educativo e que nos transformaram nas pessoas que somos hoje. Por isso, isto é algo que nos apaixona também por essa razão. Nos próximos 3 dias teremos, então, falaremos sobre educação e falaremos sobre a transição do sistema pré-escolar para o primeiro ciclo, para primary school, depois da escola primária para o ensino secundário e depois do ensino secundário, então, para a vida pós-escolar. São momentos-chave na vida de todos os alunos, foram importantes na nossa vida também, e então para aqueles alunos com necessidades especiais, alunos com deficiência, é ainda mais marcante. E aqui a articulação entre serviços, do qual nós, como prestadores de serviços para as pessoas com deficiência, temos um papel muito importante a desempenhar. Há informação que nós passamos que influenciam de forma
Miguel,
muito intensa.
Sorry, if I can just stop you there. There seems to be an issue with the translation. Dimitri, I don't know if you can help. But maybe, okay, do you want to try that? Yep.
If you prefer, I'll
Yes, we
continue
hear
in
you,
English.
yes. Okay.
Is it okay now?
I will have to give you a 1-minute warning, Miguel, as we.
Okay. But do you prefer that I continue in English or should I continue in Portuguese?
It's okay in Portuguese.
Ok. Então, nestes momentos de transição, como prestadores de serviços e como organizações que apoiam não só crianças, mas também famílias, temos aqui um papel importante na passagem de informação importante para o sistema educativo, nomeadamente na entrada da escola, por exemplo. Não é? O primeiro dia de escola é marcante para qualquer criança.
Excuse me, sorry, Miguel. The interpreters, we can hear both of you at the same time. We can hear 2 interpreters on the English channel.
Okay.
At the same time.
So can I?
You can go on, Miguel.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay. Thank you for the warning. A entrada do sistema educativo é um momento tão importante, o primeiro dia de aulas. Nós, como prestadores de serviços, poderemos ajudar a escola a definir melhores práticas, por exemplo, para esse momento tão importante. É tão importante um aluno com deficiência, independentemente do grau de incapacidade que tenha, que esteja presente no primeiro dia de aulas, junto aos seus colegas, e que não seja recebido numa sala à parte, numa sala onde também os pais são recebidos à parte, porque este é um primeiro momento de inclusão, deve ser celebrado, e nós todos nos lembramos dos butterfly on the stomach, aquela sensação de agitação neste primeiro dia de aulas, não é? E estamos todos ao mesmo nível. É o primeiro dia, é onde estabelecem-se às vezes as relações para uma vida. Aconteceu no meu caso, ainda sou amigo do colega que por acaso me sentei ao lado no primeiro dia de aulas, e essas relações perduram. Por isso, há momentos importantes que devem ser preservados na vida escolar destes alunos com deficiência, e o nosso papel também como providenciadores de serviços deve ter um papel ativo. And so, Rachel, thank you so much for the extra time.
We have some important speakers ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. A seguir, eu gostaria muito, é uma honra poder apresentar aqui o nosso secretário de Estado Adjunto e da Educação, Dr. João Costa, que lhe dou a palavra. Obrigado.
Obrigado, muito bom dia a todos. É um gosto ter-vos aqui em Lisboa, ainda que virtualmente, e sobretudo é uma grande honra para mim poder participar nesta sessão de abertura, e por isso queria agradecer ao Sr. Presidente Jim Crow, ao Dr. Miguel Valls, a todos
the network of services for children in need. Well, actually, it's.
Sorry, you can hear the translation, yeah, in English.
It's okay. We just muted him, so sorry. Carry on. Okay. I apologize.
Portanto, estava a agradecer a honra enorme que é participar nesta sessão de abertura, e mesmo com muita pena de não ter 3 dias livres nas minhas atividades para conseguir acompanhar este programa que me parece mesmo muito interessante, e tenho a certeza que iria aprender muito com a vossa experiência, com o vosso conhecimento, com o vosso olhar. O Dr. Miguel, de certa forma, tornou a minha tarefa fácil, porque contou um pouco aqui a história do caminho que temos vindo a percorrer em Portugal, e também a oportunidade que temos tido de aprender com outros países, partilhar também as nossas práticas, influenciar e sermos influenciados naquela que é uma percepção sobre inclusão. Nós, de facto, a história é que o Dr. Miguel Valls contou. Nós começámos ainda antes dos anos 90, ainda antes da Declaração de Salamanca. Eu tenho este orgulho de dizer que fomos pioneiros, verdadeiramente pioneiros, e isto permitiu-nos fazer um caminho que tem de facto um início, em parte logo depois dos anos 70, depois com uma grande aceleração a partir no final dos anos 90, uma enorme aceleração com a lei de 2008, e é este caminho que nos permitiu chegar ao momento anterior à legislação que temos agora em vigor, que foi aprovada em 2018, e que constitui um passo muito ambicioso, uma peça legislativa de enorme ambição, mas só conseguimos estar onde estamos porque há um caminho de várias décadas trilhado, sempre com alguma ousadia, mas sempre também sem perder o foco daquilo que interessa. Nós, antes de 2018, já tínhamos quase 98% das crianças e jovens com deficiência integradas no sistema de ensino, em escolas em que conviviam com outros alunos. Agora, sabíamos também, e foi possível fazer uma avaliação dos impactos e da implementação desta legislação, e sabíamos que ainda podíamos dar mais passos em frente. O que é que isto significa? Significa que conseguimos construir esta percepção e este relativo consenso sobre a necessidade de dar um passo grande da integração para a inclusão plena. E a diferença, eu conto muitas vezes uma história que pude testemunhar numa escola, quem já ouviu peço desculpa, mas vou contar outra vez, que eu acho que foi a minha maior lição dada por crianças e por professoras sobre a diferença entre integrar e incluir. Foi um dia em que, acontece todos os anos, a nossa Proteção Civil organiza um simulacro de terremoto e as crianças, depois de aprenderem, durante um tempo, a uma hora combinada em todo o país, adotam os procedimentos de proteção, não é? Proteção individual, perante um alarme de terremoto. E visitei com outros colegas de governo duas salas praticamente iguais, duas salas de segundo ano, crianças de 7 anos, e por mera coincidência, nas duas havia um menino em cada uma delas, um menino em cadeira de rodas. E o que aconteceu foi que numa das salas há um colega seu que se levanta, corre, tira o amigo da cadeira de rodas, arrasta-o pelo chão para debaixo de uma mesa e deita-se por cima dele a protegê-lo. Na outra estava lá um adulto que pegou na cadeira de rodas, virou-a para ele ficar a ver os seus colegas a participarem no simulacro. Este, obviamente, estava integrado, o primeiro estava incluído. E o que é interessante é pensar no que está por trás desta experiência. Eu não tenho a menor dúvida que, em termos de preparação, o primeiro grupo de alunos trabalhou mais. Teve de pensar quem é que seria capaz de ajudar o colega, como é que fazia para não o magoar, como é que fazia para ir a tempo de proteger os dois, mas também tenho a certeza que nenhum deste tempo que foi usado na preparação foi tempo perdido. Na verdade, o primeiro grupo aprendeu mais, porque não foi apenas o aluno com deficiência que participou, foram todos os alunos da turma que participaram e todos perceberam, em termos de formação, que uma formação que inclui todos é uma formação mais rica. Portanto, este era o passo que queríamos dar, um passo que vai eu estou aqui a tentar fugir do sol que me está a bater em frente nos olhos e que é a alinhar o computador, agora acho que já estou bem. Portanto, era o passo que queríamos dar, como eu disse, um passo ambicioso e que tem várias dimensões a que o Dr. Miguel já se referiu, mas que eu gostava de referir novamente. O primeiro é esta amplificação do conceito de inclusão, ou seja, não temos já, como foi dito, uma legislação centrada apenas na deficiência, mas sim que convida as escolas a olharem para todos os alunos que, por alguma razão, seja deficiência ou seja outra, não encontram na escola a capacidade de aceder ao currículo. Ou seja, o espírito desta legislação é exatamente a da remoção de barreiras para o acesso ao currículo. E pode ser porque há alguma incapacidade física, cognitiva, mas também, como sabemos aqui em Portugal e em grande parte do mundo, porque o contexto familiar, socioeconómico, não é um contexto que seja estimulante para o estabelecimento de uma relação com a escola, seja porque o aluno está a passar uma fase da sua vida que, em termos de desenvolvimento emocional, em termos de perturbação, algum aspecto de saúde mental, pode estar a passar uma fase transitória em que requer mais apoio e neste momento, com com os efeitos, por exemplo, da pandemia. Nós sabemos que por todo o mundo se fala, como nunca se falou, da importância de apoiar os alunos na dimensão socioemocional, porque houve alunos, os efeitos dos confinamentos são pesados em termos de saúde das crianças e dos jovens. Portanto, é daqui que nasce esta alteração legislativa de não precisarmos à partida de ter um registro clínico. Ou seja, pode haver crianças que precisam de apoios porque têm, de facto, qualquer situação clínica identificada, mas pode simplesmente ser necessário o apoio por outras condições sociais, condições transitórias, porque o aluno não fala, no nosso caso, o português como língua materna e encontra na própria língua uma barreira no acesso ao currículo. Portanto, a parte clínica pode ser relevante, mas pode não ser, e o que interessa é olhar para o aluno como um todo e ver quais são as dificuldades que encontra e então trabalharmos nessa dimensão. Se precisar de um apoio terapêutico, precisa, mas se precisar de um apoio social, precisa. Se precisar de um reforço de aprendizagens ou de uma diversificação de estratégias na sua aula, também é para aí que caminhamos. Portanto, há aqui também um pressuposto grande e que nem sempre, sobretudo no arranque do trabalho para a construção desta legislação, nem sempre foi aceito por todos, deixem-me pôr assim, que é o pressuposto de que todos nós, todos os cidadãos têm capacidade para aprender. Ou seja, eu não estou condenado a priori a ter um rótulo na testa que diz este não vai aprender. E daí a questão terminológica do que é especial, do que é específico, parecem ser pormenores, mas não são. Ou seja, aquilo que nós queremos é construir um currículo inclusivo, porque é um currículo que leva cada um de nós ao limite das suas capacidades. E isto prende-se então com uma abordagem que faz com que esta peça legislativa não exista sozinha, não consiga existir sozinha, e daí o lado muito ambicioso do edifício legislativo que temos vindo a construir, porque esta peça encaixa num trabalho mais amplo que começa na definição do que se espera dos alunos ao final de 12 anos de escolaridade, um perfil do aluno que construímos que assenta em alguns princípios, em alguns valores. Um dos valores inscrito no perfil é exatamente a inclusão, mas que diz que é objetivo da escola, é objetivo do currículo português, o desenvolvimento de várias áreas de competência, de 10 áreas de competência, que incluem, entre outras, a resolução de problemas, o pensamento crítico, o pensamento criativo, o relacionamento interpessoal, a autonomia como área de competência a desenvolver, e isto é um perfil para todos os alunos, todos. O que significa que, por exemplo, quando inscrevemos o relacionamento interpessoal como área de desenvolvimento, isto significa que se definiu a escola não como um campeonato individual, em que o objetivo é ir no lugar da frente, mas sim como um espaço de aprendizagem cooperativa, em conjunto com todos e em que todos olhamos
Sorry,
para
Mr.
todos.
Costa. Sorry, I have to give you 1 more minute.
Okay.
The time is moving on. Thank you very much.
Segunda dimensão, o trabalho no próprio currículo, ou seja, um currículo demasiado obeso não permite que haja diferenciação pedagógica em sala de aula. E nessa medida, fizemos também um trabalho de definição de aprendizagens essenciais para libertar tempo para novas formas de trabalhar, novas abordagens. Quisemos também que estivesse associado aos 3 últimos anos de escolaridade dos alunos com medidas mais específicas, um plano de transição para a vida ativa, ou para a vida pós ensino secundário, para ser trabalhado com as famílias, com a comunidade, e para isso inserimos também nesta legislação uma dimensão fundamental, que é o envolvimento parental e o envolvimento da comunidade. Ou seja, muito se faz na escola, mas a escola sozinha pode ser insuficiente, porque o aluno, ao fim do dia, está com a sua família, está no seu bairro, está na sua comunidade. Uma nota mesmo final, com a permissão da Rachel e alguma tolerância, aquilo que queremos e estamos a desenvolver é uma abordagem, termo em inglês, whole school approach, em que a inclusão não é a responsabilidade daquele professor que é de educação especial, ou do psicólogo, ou do assistente social. A inclusão é uma responsabilidade de cada pessoa que está na escola, inclusive a dos alunos. E por isso estamos a desenvolver um programa de mentorias em que os alunos são responsáveis uns pelos outros. Numa assunção muito clara de que este não é um programa isento de uma visão sobre educação, é uma visão que rejeita explicitamente o conceito de homogeneidade e de turmas homogéneas e de grupos homogéneos. A homogeneidade não existe entre os seres humanos, o que é o valor principal é o valor da diferença. Uma visão sobre educação em que vários planos, não tenho tempo para falar, mas na área das artes, na área do desporto, são peças-chave como instrumentos para a inclusão sobretudo, muito apoiado num outro documento fundamental que criámos, a Estratégia de Educação para a Cidadania, porque quando falamos de inclusão, falamos de direitos humanos. Quando a lei foi aprovada, houve quem nos pedisse: vamos aguardar mais um ano até estar tudo preparado. E na altura eu tive a oportunidade de dizer: não, vamos arrancar, porque os direitos humanos, a inclusão é sobre direitos humanos, e os direitos humanos não se adiam. Nós nunca teremos as condições ideais e por isso, educação inclusiva é sempre work in progress. Muito obrigado e um bom congresso.
Dr. João Costa, muito obrigado pela sua intervenção, foi um prazer recebê-lo aqui e de certeza que muito enriqueceu aqui a nossa conferência. Rachel, I'll give back the floor for you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for ending on those important messages, and thank you very much for the work that you're doing in Portugal. And with that, I will move on to our keynote speaker. I'm very sorry for cutting you short, Mr. Costa. But we will move on to our keynote speaker. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Tony Boo, who is co-author of the Index for Inclusion. Since its first publication in the year 2000, the Index for Inclusion has stood as a cornerstone for inclusive school development, providing a set of materials to guide schools through the inclusion process. So Tony, I hand over to you, and please take as much time as you need.
Okay, I hope you can all hear me. Yeah. Well, I'm going to focus on an inclusion question. How should we live together? It's really good to spend some time with you. And it's been great to already hear of the way the Portuguese system is being led by inclusive values in its development. It feels that this is quite deep. I hope that everybody is well, and I know that some will be facing difficult times because of the pandemic, as well as the other problems that we face in our lives. And I wish I could talk with you more directly. I know the interpreters will be a great help, and thank you to them for assisting my inclusion in this meeting. You can ask me some questions. I think there's a question facility, and maybe I'll have some chance to address them when I finish in a few minutes. How should we live together is one of two fundamental questions for inclusion, for education and life. The second question I ask is, what do we need to know to live together well? This second question is about the way we develop and organize knowledge. In schools in the United Kingdom, we call this the curriculum, though I know there's a strong and different tradition of didactics in German-speaking and Northern European countries. But today I'll focus on my first question. How should we live together? We recognize that schools are not just places where children learn to become adults or acquire knowledge and skills that might be useful to them later in life. Most of us know now that children are beings with rights in the same way as adults. And so we've come to see schools as places where you can be yourself, where you can learn, where you can live as well as become something for the future. They're places where children and also adults learn to live together well. As one 8-year-old girl, Rachel, said to me when she was discussing the purpose of school, I know the answer, she said. It's to be who you really are. This question, how should we live together, has never been more important. We're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction on planet Earth. This is extinction powered by human activity. And how we answer it, how we answer that question about how we should live together may determine how the planet and life on it, including human life, survives over the next few decades. We're dealing with a life or death question. If schools ignore the most important issues of our time, including impending climate and biodiversity breakdown, which is also related to the mass movement of people around the world, what are schools for? Some would say that they're there to lead young people away from asking challenging questions, but I can't accept that. My question is an ancient philosophical question. As asked in ancient Greece and Rome, it took the form, how should a rich man live? We reject that restriction, even though we may know that the world is structured in large part as if that were still the main focus. So we're not just concerned with rich men, but about how we, all of us, should live together, men and women, adults and children. EASPD, the European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities, and so I am sure many of you argue that part of the answer to my first fundamental question is that we should not separate people into those with and without disabilities, either inside or outside school. And this has great implications for how services are provided and the buildings that are constructed to contain such services. It involves a movement for deinstitutionalization for children and adults. It means the dismantling of separate systems of mainstream and special education and the progressive closure of separate special schools. I recognize that most of you will understand that increasing the participation of students with disabilities in the mainstream means the closure of many special schools, most special schools, almost all of them. When I was advocating inclusion in the 1970s, I sometimes met with a very aggressive response from those who worked in or with special schools. In 1975, I was giving a seminar at our weekly meeting of educational psychologists in the city of Sheffield. I was saying that if more children with disabilities were in mainstream schools, then less would be in special schools, which would be progressively closed. This seemed like basic arithmetic to me. Yet one of my colleagues looked angrily at me. "How can you be so horrible?" she said. I suppose she was thinking of her colleagues who worked in special schools whose jobs would change. On another occasion, a colleague told me that a special education advisor from a neighboring town to my home had suggested that she attack me in my car for my views. "If you see Tony Booth driving past," he had said, "in his car, chuck a brick through his window from me." Advocating inclusion did become much more widespread in the latter part of the last century and in the beginning of this 21st century. And I haven't heard such aggressive responses in recent times. In England, I think this was partly because the threat to the existence of special schools went away due to the vastly increased pressures on mainstream schools and changes to the way schools were governed. The relative independence of schools made coherent planning virtually impossible. I've not surveyed how the movement away from segregation is progressing in all the countries represented here. In the United Kingdom and several other countries, this process has stalled, and in some countries, it has gone into reverse. The pressures on schools in my country, England, to produce particular kinds of achievements in competition with one another means that many of those managing schools look to identify anyone they imagine will impede their scramble for success and discourage their attendance. In one school, this may be a child with a disability. In another school, it may be a new arrival to the country. In a third school, it may be a gypsy, Roma, or traveler young person. Because it is clear that young people with disabilities are not the only ones who face exclusionary pressures, I ask how big a part of inclusion can be taken up by the advocacy of the participation of people with disabilities. How much focus should be placed on disability, even for organizations like EASPD? Of course, if we look at the inclusion literature, say by doing an internet search, it seems that discussions of inclusion are almost entirely dominated by issues of disability and special educational need. Yet we owe it to ourselves to make our own sense. If inclusion is a good thing, that seems to mean that exclusion is a bad thing. And if exclusion is bad, we have to think about who is excluded. Who faces exclusionary pressures? In various areas across Europe, disabled people, yes, but who else? I don't know how much your countries were touched by the Black Lives Matter movement emanating from the United States after George Floyd was murdered by Derek Chauvin, a police officer, or whether it was mainly confined to an Anglo-Saxon bubble. But it drew attention to continuing racism in the United Kingdom and has prompted repeated protests, which in my city of Cambridge take place every week. I'm presently involved in a Council of Europe project, which has a focus on reducing discrimination against Roma in education. Discrimination against Roma is perhaps the form of racism most closely integrated into the systems and politics of several European countries. A colleague passed an article to me about an advertisement in a political campaign in the Czech Republic a couple of years ago. This advertisement was placed on the back of a bus, and it read, "A healthy school for a healthy school without inclusion." We call this a dog whistle, a signal that can be picked up by all those tuned into the right frequency. It means healthy schools without Roma. And it was there to let people know that if they shared in such prejudice, this party, this political party, was a natural home for them. The bus driver realized what was happening and refused to drive the bus with that slogan. He also made the links between the exclusion of Roma and other forms of exclusion, including of his own children. And he said, "It may be all the same to the bus company what people, what children their vehicles are attacking, but I'm sorry, it's not all the same to me." That advertisement might as well read, "For a healthy society without Jews." I do not intend to participate in this, to be part of spitting on the children who are being included, to insult them, especially not my own daughter. I have 2 children disabled by autism. That slogan greatly offends me. The bus driver made those links between forms of exclusion, but not everybody manages to achieve that. I have known senior academics involved in education who have argued for the inclusion of children with disabilities while expressing strongly discriminatory attitudes to other groups. And even if we are relatively free of prejudice, the literature directs our attention towards thinking of inclusion as about only disability and special educational needs. This is a widespread and powerful form of institutional discrimination. If we fail to make those links, we become selective about the disabled children and adults that we assist. Is it only white, heterosexual, male disabled people who are worthy of our support? And if we focus on the disabled part of someone, we fail to include them as a whole person and so contribute to their exclusion. To have too strong a focus on disability and special educational need can be disableist. Do we make these links clear in inclusion law? I can see that the 2018 law in Portugal is a very good law, and I'll have to study it more carefully to understand to what extent it is an anti-discrimination law for all people. The term special educational needs operates like a vacuum cleaner. It sucks up educational difficulties that have arisen through barriers in the curriculum, through difficulties in relationships, or through discrimination on the basis of gender or ethnicity, and it sucks them into an individual deficit bag. In this way, the language of special educational needs contributes to such things as the scandal of the discriminatory placement in special schools of Roma children, particularly, but not only, within Eastern Europe. We know that those categorized as having special educational needs are predominantly boys, those living in poverty, and those from devalued ethnic groups. I argued 40 years ago for the ending of the use of the concept of special educational needs, and it's lovely to hear this echoed in the presentation from the Portuguese minister earlier. I suggested that its meaning should just be needs that are not currently met. Later, I proposed with a little more success that we replace special educational needs with barriers to learning and participation. I and others have largely failed so far to end the widespread use of a division between those with and without special educational needs, or the placement of the latter into special schools. And I'm sorry that we didn't have more success, and I'm really encouraged by the determination of you all here to make a greater success than I have. I put my failure to achieve this into a box with all the other things I failed to achieve over the last several decades, like the ending of the monarchy in the UK, or more recently, the continuation of the United Kingdom in the European Union. So, I include everybody in the we. In how should we live together, adults and children. Some of you may be familiar with the Index for Inclusion, now in its 4th edition. I make clear there that there's little hope for developing inclusion in schools unless we see it as making schools better places for adults as well as children, for teachers and non-teaching staff, and the families of children and young people. I know you'll be talking over the next 3 days about the School for All, and I hope you will not confine yourselves to developing cultures, policies, and practices only within school buildings. That's a concern I have about universal design, that it often seems tied to prepared curricula with goals that are known about in advance, rather than those that emerge in an exploratory way in the process of learning. Teaching for diversity is immeasurably enriched and supported by learning outside classrooms and learning about the world. So a school is not confined to a place or a country. In a School for All, teaching and learning recognize that we live in a planet shared by all. But the we with whom we share this planet is broader than just people. On average, mammal, bird, fish, reptile, and amphibian populations have declined by around 2/3 since 1970. And the decline in insect populations may be greater still. we are taking away the supports that are essential to the ecosystems that allow us, our children, our grandchildren to flourish. So the we has to include non-human animals too. We have to find a way to flourish that allows other animals also to flourish. And is that the end of the matter? Perhaps not. Like many of you, because this is how human populations develop, like many of you, I live near a river. When it rains heavily, the water company, owned by some private asset company located somewhere, I'm not even sure where it is, it calls itself the Cambridge Water Company, but it's nothing to do with Cambridge. Like when it rains heavily, this water company lets raw sewage into my river because this is cheap for them. And that poisons the fish and makes it hazardous for people to bathe. So on Midsummer Evening this year, June the 21st, we're going to celebrate our river and its interrelationship with our lives by declaring its rights according to the International Declaration of River Rights, taken from the long-standing practice of indigenous peoples of the Americas and Australia and New Zealand, and no doubt elsewhere. And the air we breathe, is that not part of us too? So how should we live together? Us, animals, trees, rocks and air. We need to broaden our horizons, open our arms and our hearts. In that way, we have a chance, maybe a small chance, but we have a chance that future generations will be able to flourish on this planet, to be included, to participate, to live and love, and educate the next generations. We, more you than me now, we have a fine job on our hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony, for opening up and giving a great start to our conference. Unfortunately, we're running behind a bit, so we don't have time for any questions, but I can see from the chat, there's everybody enjoyed your opening speech very much, so thank you again.
Thank you.
And now we will move to our first panel that we moderated by the co-chair of our member fora on education, Annie Yenes, and this will be looking at the state of play of inclusive education so far. While our speakers for this panel prepare ourselves, as we've already said, we had wanted to meet in Portugal, and unfortunately we couldn't because of COVID-19. It hasn't been possible, but we didn't want you to miss out on the beauty of Lisbon, and so we have a little something to share with you now. And so hopefully my colleague will just be sharing it.
Welcome everyone. On behalf of CSD Media Sintra and ESPD, the European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities, I would like to welcome you everyone to our international conference on inclusive education and beyond. So for the next 3 days, we will speak about what is passionate about, what we are living for, which is for inclusive education. And I hope that you all see and know a bit more about Lisbon. So enjoy and see you in a bit.
So thank you very much for that, Miguel, for introducing us to Lisbon. Certainly wish that we could be there in the sun now, particularly from grey Brussels. And with that, I hand over to the moderator of our first panel, Annemie Yunus.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I'm very happy to be a moderator of the first panel. My name is Annemie Yunus. I work in Katholiek Onderwijs Vlaanderen. That's the largest network of schools in Flanders and the Brussels region. And I am also the co-chair and the sparring partner of Miguel in the Member Forum of Education. Good morning, everyone. I would like to start this panel with a round of the table with our speakers to introduce themselves very shortly. First, I give the word to Aya Ringinen. Aya?
Hello. Hello, everybody. And good morning and greetings from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. It's my pleasure to be here with you and hearing those previous speakers sharing with us such a powerful messages. I represent here the World Bank, and I will be telling in this panel something about the World Bank's and my personal views on the issue that we are talking about today. And I have a master's degree in special education, so this issue is very close to my heart. And then I have a PhD in educational management and policy making, and this inclusive education is a very important issue when talking about the policies. But this about me. I'm from Finland originally, and now working for the World Bank. So that's about me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Aya. Now I give the word to Andrea from Portugal. Andrea, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. Good morning and bom dia a todos. I am Andrea Baleca, educational psychologist at Portuguese Association of Parents and Friends of People with Disabilities, affiliate of Humanitas, Portuguese Federation for Mental Disability, and we want to thank them the opportunity to be here on their behalf.
Thank you. Now we go to Carmen from Germany. Carmen?
Hi, good morning, everybody, and hello to Malaysia. My name is Carmen Dorrens. To introduce myself is one of what's important for me is that I'm a mother of a son who is meantime 28 years old, is using a wheelchair, early born, spastic tetraparese. And we from Germany, and it's a part of my biography with my son and the son and me about fighting, getting in mainstream kindergarten, preschool, mainstream school. Yeah, and it was a big fight, and meantime, okay, it's 20 years ago. Could be the hopes that is meantime better, but I'm busy with that a lot of barriers still in Germany. that parents, children get in mainstream school, that they still have to fight for. And so a sign that it is not inclusion, not well enough developed here to establish inclusion. Okay. Teacher.
Thank you, Carmen. I give now the word to Denisa from Czechia.
Hello, everybody. I work at Masaryk University at Faculty of Education. I am psychologist, and currently I work on national research of inclusion in primary schools in our republic.
Thank you. And finally, I give the floor to Stefan from the European Commission, please.
Good morning, Stefan Iszkowski, Policy Officer at Social Investment Strategy Unit at DG Employment and Social Affairs. I work mainly on child guarantee and child-related policies in the European Commission.
Thank you very much. So the theme of our first panel is, where are we now? What is the state of play of inclusive education in Europe? But first of all, we want to have a broader view. And we have asked to Aya from the World Bank, what is the current state of inclusive education based on the latest research and report of the World Bank? And we will get a broader view than only Europe, I guess, Aya. So please, I give the floor to you.
Thank you so much. Well, this is such a broad issue, so it was difficult to choose what to say in a short amount of time. But I want to start about from telling you that when I started my own journey and went to school in 1970s, our family lived in a small rural village in Finland. And it was really an inclusive school that I went to. But at that time, it was not a pedagogical choice, but it was a necessity because the school was so far away, the next school. So we all, regardless of the disabilities or needs for support, we all went to the same school, the one that we had in our village. So the inclusive education grew in me already in the early years. And then after finalizing my master's degree on special education, I started my career in education as a special education teacher. And that was in the beginning of 1990s. And then at that time, we talked about integration. And since then, we have made big leaps on the topic towards the inclusiveness. So now we are talking about the inclusive education. And I think it is a great thing that we are doing that. But there still remains a lot to be done in Europe and globally. And when we talk about the inclusive education, first we need to define what we mean by that. I joined World Bank only last year, and before that I worked at the Ministry of Education and Culture in Finland. And in that role, I participated many European Commission working groups and European level seminars. And I noticed that in some countries, inclusiveness meant a possibility for students to go to school. And that was the inclusive education. And then the others, when they talked about inclusive education, it meant for them very holistic possibilities to take part of the schooling in the child's own neighborhood school, the mainstream school, with their peers and with all the support services provided. And these two things are pretty far away from each other, as we know. So when we are talking about inclusion, we are talking about a very wide issue. And inclusiveness in education means looking after a broad group of learners, children and youth and even adults, who are at risk of living out of something that they are supposed to have or they are entitled to have. including educational choices and possibilities. And more than 1 billion people globally, about 15% of the world's population, are estimated to have some kind of disability. And adding all the people that are in a need of some type of support or assistance due to their needs, the number is a lot higher. And when we think about our lives, who wouldn't need support at some point? We all do. But when we look at the people with the disabilities and need for support globally, we can notice that they face higher rates of multidimensional poverty and encounter barriers in the attitudes of the society and in their living environment when compared with their peers without these needs. And these barriers that people with the need for support face hinder their full and effective participation in a society. Building an inclusive society starts already in early years. We, the people working on the education sector, have an important role in ensuring high quality education for all, learners with disabilities included. And inclusion is not an add-on or nice to have feature, but it is an integral cross-cutting part of education strategy, aiming to ensure a meaningful learning experience for everybody. There are a lot of children in the world who do not have access in school. And even if they have the access, they face barriers in learning. World Bank's overall aim is to reduce poverty and boost shared prosperity. In that work, inclusion is a critical principle to follow. World Bank also finds the inclusive education to be one of the key aspects of a quality education. When all children are included and accounted for in mainstream education, that will increase both quality and equity of the education systems. We have published research and materials to support countries in developing their education systems in inclusive way. I could mention here 3 of them if someone is interested in taking a closer look. First, an inclusive education resource guide can be used to support countries in implementing inclusive development projects. Secondly, disability inclusion and accountability framework supports disability inclusion agenda, and World Bank's environmental and social framework promotes non-discrimination for persons with disabilities. The key message in this work, actually in all of them, is to identify the risks and impacts of projects on persons with disabilities and to how to prevent and mitigate such risks. It is also important to empower persons with disabilities to participate in and benefit from the development progress. World Bank has made a commitment to promote inclusion, and our education global team is determined to ensure that all of our education projects and programs will be disability inclusive by the end of 2025. That is our goal. And thanks, that's all from me. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Aya, for this global view on inclusive education. And it struck me that a lot of children do not have access and even then face a lot of barriers. So it's a very global issue. Before we go into depth to look at some countries, what is the state of play in these countries, I would like to mention the Barometer report that EASPD has launched now in 2020. It was, the author is Professor Wolfgang Plotter from Salzburg, and we get a state of play in 12 European countries. The barometer report started in a European project, Pathways to Inclusion, and we have now a new update about the legislation towards inclusive education in these countries, how it goes in practice, and what is the progress of the implementation. Also, it's really a good report to read through, because we have also looked at what can we learn from the COVID pandemic, and what is the impact of the COVID pandemic on inclusive education. And I can tell you that as we all have experienced and experience still, that there is a big impact of the COVID pandemic on inclusive education. So it's very good to have a look at it and to learn from that. So I really recommend this barometer report. You can find it on the website of ESPD. Now we would like to have a look at Portugal and Germany. First, I give the floor to Andrea to give a view on the situation of inclusion in important, and also the impact of the COVID pandemic in Portugal. Andrea, please, the floor is yours.
There is an African proverb that says an entire village is needed to educate a child. Let's look at the village as a school. Let's talk briefly about the background that led us to change the last Portuguese legislative regime before embracing a true inclusive education law. The last Decree Law 3/2008 already provided an inclusive school for the education of students with some type of handicap or disability. With this decree, there was a reorientation of special education schools, which meant that students who were segregated in special schools started to attend regular school. Gradually, special education schools began to close. More and more students with disabilities were integrated into regular schools. After 10 years, and despite all of the good intention of this decree, it was concluded that the school culture wasn't very inclusive, and students with special needs quickly became under the responsibility of special education teachers. Inclusion was talked about, but integration was practiced. Soon, Decree Law 3/2008 starts to be called as Law of Special Education. We realized that to include students, it wasn't enough to be inside the school. They had to participate and to be involved in the educational community. Clinical diagnoses were the gateway in assessing support, as well as the categorization of special need. For this reason, students with temporary needs and mild situations were left out. The center of the intervention concentrated on individual adjustment in the disability or special need, which compromised a broader approach to accessibility, contextual, and universally designed. So the village had to change and become a place to answer the diversity of all of its children. On July 6, 2018, Decree Law 54 was regulated, which established the principles and norms of inclusion as a process to respond to the diversity of all students by increasing learning participation and the life of the educational community. It determines that regular schools and regular classrooms are the proper spaces to educate of all students. And Decree Law did not come alone. It came with Decree Law 55, guiding principles and procedures to achieve the profile of students leaving obligatory school. Decree Law 54, 2018 is based on principles of universal design for learning and personalization through a multi-level approach with different intervention measures. Universal measures answers that the school has to improve learning of all students, selective measures obtained through the school's resources and to be mobilized when the universal measures prove to be insufficient, and additional measures to address persistent needs in terms of communication, social interaction, cognitive or learning, which already requires specialized resources, always favoring classroom support. Multidisciplinary teams to support inclusive education were created in schools to assess or monitor the measures and strategies to support learning and inclusion. Also, eliminate barriers, raise awareness, and empower the school community in the sense of social transformation and paradigm shift. It was stipulated that everyone, families, teachers, or technicians can signal students to this team so that they can assess the measures. It was reinforced involvement and participation of families at all stages of students' educational process. It was emphasized that students with additional measures for greater needs should have an individual transition plan prepared 3 years before the end of mandatory education to include a type of response for employment or active community life. Then, 1 year after the law was in effect, we received the news of a virus that was spreading around the world. We had 2 lockdowns, first between March 2020 until the end of school year, and second between January and March this year. It is true that we had a negative impact on inclusive education, especially in students who need more support and who were unable to have human specialized resources nearby, in students who did not have technological means for distance learning or who have greater needs that prevent them from learning through the computer, the deprivation of participation in their natural educational context implied the loss of concrete experience among peers. Families who become teachers and technicians to ensure that continuity of their children's learning caused daily wear and a consequent impact on their well-being and mental health. In the end, we managed to learn through both lockdowns, and with time, the distance felt shorter. If schools were not prepared for an uncertain reality, they quickly realized that they had to act and anticipate the future. They provide students with the necessary technology for learning at distance. Because there was a negative impact on students that need more support, the schools made preparations to receive them back in classrooms, ensuring that they maintain their routines, participate in a natural educational context, minimizing the damage previously observed. One of the bigger positives was the growth of the relationship between families and schools. The benefits were bidirectional. Schools assume a role of support and guidance to families, and families understood better work developed in school, called for true participation and involvement in the educational process of the children. When this relationship was achieved, the family felt more confident, competent, and empowered. It takes an entire village to educate a child, but a child should be enough to change the entire village. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these very, very nice words, especially the last one I really like. So thank you. Carmen, what about the situation of inclusion in Germany and the impact you felt in Germany by the pandemic? Please, the floor is yours.
So I will have a view, like I told you before, part of mine is being mother of a kid with special needs, meantime adult. A part is that I had been almost 25 years long a teacher in primary school, made a PhD in education and inclusion, and meantime a professor. And that is a view, but I tell you a couple of problems we have in Germany. I took some out, more problems, but some out to explain you the situation about inclusion in Germany and impact of COVID. Maybe also in the rights of persons with disability is since 2009 in Germany. a kind of law, yeah, a law. And Germany has 16 federal states. They have implemented the requirements with varying degrees of binding force, both legally and practically. That means, for example, Bremen, that is more in the north of Germany, decided that schools should become inclusive schools and that special schools should not be abolished. Should be abolished, sorry, and has legally done so. But in the south of Germany, for example, Baden-Württemberg or Bavaria, they continue with the existence of special schools. Even that I know in Bavaria that they're going on building new special schools instead of running out with that model of schooling. That is a first problem. A second problem is in Germany, more integration is currently taking place together with stable or increasing segregation at the same time. That means in special needs schools, in separating schools, the number of pupils are increasing, and in mainstream school. So, because if you see only the numbers in mainstream schools, that it's increasing kids with special needs. So you could think, then they not longer in separating schools, but both are increasing. That means diagnostic is everywhere getting more, and even more kids getting the label of being a kid with special education needs. Then the quality of inclusion, structural deficit, not enough resources. However, the rates say little about how successfully inclusion is implemented in the schools. Many teachers complain about a lack of support. 2/3 say they have to teach alone in the called inclusive classes. One reason for this, that in most of the federal states that want to implement inclusion in schools quickly, concepts for inclusive teaching were not tested and evaluated in advance. Inclusive teaching was often carried out according to learning by doing. Problem number 4 is no consistent training in inclusive pedagogical and didactical competences. In order to implement inclusion in schools, inclusion would have to be a focus in teacher training. This has not been the case so far. Example, the 16 Kinder- und Jugendbericht der Bundesregierung, that is a report of the government, shows that inclusion requirement in the school system of the federal states differ in many ways. There's many aspects where is everywhere in Germany different. Problem number 5, COVID and the social inequality. The pandemic has exposed the deficits in the education system of Germany, especially with regard to the fact of social inequality. As you know, there is a close connection between family background and educational opportunities in Germany. This connection is being reinforced by the pandemic. The area-wide closures of school showed how important educational institutions are for parents to be able to reconcile work and family life. But first and foremost, the children and young people themselves who need the support and social contacts with their peers and teachers. That is element what we heard before also. In the meantime, studies have shown that especially those children were hit hard by the closure and could not receive enough support in homeschooling because they come from socially disadvantaged background, do not speak German as their mother tongue, or are less familiar with academic educational content. And the problem number 6, the last, what I want to say in the moment, COVID and digitalization. In its memorandum, the Pact for Inclusion 2021 calls for thinking about the implementing educational inclusion and digitalization together. It points out that participation in education is a human right. All young people must have access to high quality, inclusive education and digital learning opportunities. Currently, too little importance is attached to this, both socially and politically. Visions, projects, and concrete measures for the digitalization of educational process are not barrier-free and socially balanced. Example, inclusion and accessibility in education are not given enough consideration. The Minister Conference Agreement on the common basic structure of the school system and overall responsibility of the federal states is an example for the political ignorance towards inclusion and accessible digitalization. Here there are neither concrete statements on inclusive education nor even ones the idea of accessibility. So in reality, during COVID and lockdown in school system, it happens not enough digitalization, but the teachers started making letters, getting homework for the kids by post office, and sometimes they had could not get in contact to the children, especially on the countryside, because there is not always everywhere in Germany, especially on the countryside, internet available, not even about the cell phone, the iPhone, mobile, yeah. Okay, thank you. I give.
Thank you very much, Carmen. So we got a clear view on the situation in Portugal and in Germany, and also what is the impact of the COVID pandemic in these two countries. But now I would like to talk about what can we learn from that and how can we improve the situation of inclusive education. So what would be your key messages for ensuring the realization of inclusive education following this pandemic? I give the floor to all the panelists who would like to react on this question. What can we do about it? What do we learn from the pandemic? And yeah, what about the future? I've heard some, there is a social inequality, there is a problem with the digitalization, there's also teachers feeling incompetent, and there is, yeah, no connection sometimes between families and teachers. So what can we learn from this? Who would like to start to answer this question?
Well, I could start.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
This is so important issue, and many of these things has already been said, but maybe what we are thinking in the World Bank is that safe and inclusive schools are the very key issue on this situation. And we have talked about safetiness and inclusiveness even before the pandemic struck, but the importance of these topics has become increasingly important in this situation when we are trying to address the global learning crisis. And then we also know that we have faced a lot of problems even before the crisis. And the two of them is that when we look at the access to education that I mentioned before, it is not self-evident in many countries. Even before the pandemic, and the school closures, there were 263 million children and youth in the world that were not able to go to school. That is the ultimate exclusion from the education system. And now with the pandemic, it's even gonna get worse, and it has become worse. And the second thing is that according to the World Bank simulations, they show that the learning poverty that we have in the world can rise from 6 to 63% due to the pandemic from the previously estimated 53%. So we are gonna have a loss in learning, and we have loss in access in education. But what we can learn is that we have all the problems when we talk about the disability inclusion, when we talk about the technologies and internet connections and devices and using and how to use them. And there are so many problems that we need to face. But I think that there is a hope, because many countries are rethinking education because of the pandemic. And that gives us all a window of opportunity to make significant and lasting changes. And when we build for the learning of the future, there are many options available to both cope with the pandemic shocks, but also build better systems. And when the governments are working on the COVID-19 responses, at the same time, they are building a foundation for a better and more resilient system than the previous one. And even if we were forced to do something in a very rapid phase, but the situation is bad and there is not too many good things on it, but maybe we can even try to learn from it. So that would be the starting point.
Okay, thank you very much, Aya. So because of the pandemic, many countries are rethinking education. That's a very important lesson. And it's a start, I guess, to build better systems and to rethink inclusive education. Of course, at the end of this panel, we will listen to Stefan Iskowski from the European Commission about the initiatives of the European Commission towards this issue. So let's save a little bit for that part. But it's nice to have a small discussion about what we have learned from the pandemic and how we look at it. Okay, other thoughts about this question? I see also in the chat, Miguel says, COVID brought to our attention the weak links on inclusive education, and it disclosed the reality on the risk of exclusion for so many students, not only students with disabilities, but all students at risk. And we have learned already that a lot of children are at risk for learning. So let's learn our lessons from this. Any other comments for now?
Yeah, before I presenting what are the Commission initiatives in linked to the topic of inclusive education, let me just have like a remark or a hypothesis from a social science perspective. So basically, what the pandemic has shown is that it increased the importance of social inequalities, and at the same time reduced the importance of physical obstacles. With education, with to online environment, we noticed that it was really a big issue, a bigger challenge for children from disadvantaged families who often did not have access to did not have good internet, who didn't have enough of IT equipment, and also who often were whose parents were often less able to assist them in learning at home. Impacts of physical barriers of getting to schools were less visible. So it is still to be researched, and obviously we'll know the impacts in full in several months or years to come, but
Okay, I cannot hear you very well. I don't know, maybe it's my computer or...
No, Stefan, I think there's an issue with your internet connection.
Yeah. So we will come back to this because you have the floor at the end of this panel. So okay, let's move on to our next speaker, and that's Denisa from Czechia. Your question is, what is the role of embracing diversity in inclusive education? And from your research, how do schools treat diversity? It's also very connected to our wonderful speech from Tony Booth. So please, Denisa, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Hello, everybody, again. Diversity is common, normal, visible in our schools today, and schools cannot ignore it. Children are different. They come from different families. They come from different social, cultural backgrounds. They have different life experiences. They have different special educational needs, and so. Inclusion has been enacted in the Czech Republic since 2016. And from this moment, school must accept all children from the neighborhood. This was a very important moment, the year 2016, because the numbers of children in segregated education are declining since then. But there is the big problem. The problem is that schools must be inclusive under legislation, and they must work with diversity. But schools usually have no systematic support in this. The Ministry of Education doesn't help schools. It does not tell them how to be inclusive. So in this environment, only some schools can work in a beneficial way with diversity. And I and my colleague, we have been arranging and working on various research projects related to inclusion and diversity at our university and our national level. The main question is, why can some schools work in a positive way with diversity and others cannot? Or what elements cause that the school to create a pro-inclusive environment? We are seeing and finding many answers, but today I would like to speak briefly about the value of having a second adult person in class. It is usually very difficult for one teacher to take into account all the individual needs of the children in the classroom. It is not impossible, but it's very difficult. Thus, a truly pro-inclusive schools make intensive use of the co-teaching process. This means in our republic that in addition to the teacher, a teaching assistant is present in the classroom. The reason is that the requirements for an assistant are usually lower than for a second teacher. So it is therefore easier for schools to involve assistants in teaching. But the teaching assistant is a relatively new element in Czech Republic, in Czech school system, and it therefore requires a lot of support from the school management. Management must be convinced of its benefits. Management must be able to explain it to teachers, because sometimes teachers disagree with participation of assistants. And management must be able to create an environment for the teacher-assistant pair to work together. And last but not least, management must be able to convince the parents of children who can be conservative and about the benefits of assistance. The classroom environment in which the teacher works with the assistants creates an opportunity to differentiate teaching and the use of differentiated instruction. The differentiation of the learning process helps to create a pro-inclusive environment for all children and allows to appreciate their diversity. And how we spoke before, the great contribution of the assistants has also been shown in the last year during the COVID pandemic, because the assistants went to excluded localities and contacted children and families who would otherwise be completely excluded from online education. And it is a really problem because the Czech Republic has the longest time in all of Europe when children did not go to school. The majority of children interrupt school sometimes in mid-October and will begin this week or next week. So it means 8 months only in online environment. And it's not possible for some families from excluded areas and so. So it's a little different topic, but it's connected to our previous talking. In summary, I would like to say that there are 3 important elements of pro-inclusive environment in schools. The first, the management's willingness to open their school for having assistants. The second, teaching assistants themselves and their cooperation with teacher. And the third, as a result from 2 previous, is differentiation in teaching. So that's my brief introduction from our research.
Thank you very much for this very clear presentation, Denisa. Are there some questions to Denisa? I would like somebody contribute to this topic. How can we contribute to the inclusive character of schools, and how can we promote inclusion? Someone wants to share a short thought about it?
Can I ask something?
Andrea? Yes, of course.
The assistant is another teacher, or it's not a teacher?
It's not a teacher because he have different education. He could be less educated than a teacher. He has usually less salary and these things.
It's also a topic of one of the workshops during this conference. So about the IMAS project is really interesting to go to this workshop to learn more about teaching assistants. Thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to Stefan from the European Commission. We see that inclusive education is rising on the political agenda of the European Union. What are the current EU initiatives to support inclusive education? Please, Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and apologies about the internet instability. It looks that I'm myself suffering as perhaps quite a few children across Europe with poor internet connections. I will be quite general and speak about 2 issues which are a product of 2 initiatives which are a product of the department of the Commission where I work. One of them is the EU strategy on the rights of and the rights of persons with disabilities. It is a part of a bigger project under the President von der Leyen, the Union of Equality. Under this Union of Equality, Commission has developed several strategies and rights of people, of not only of people with disabilities, but also the gender equality strategy, the strategy and the rights of Roma, and so on and so forth. So this comes as a Commission communication. So it is a document which sets out the plans of the Commission for the next years, and what the Commission and the Union plans to do to improve the situation of persons with disabilities. The communication has 8 chapters. You can easily Google and download it online, so I'm not going to go into much details, also because it is not my main area of competence. But among those 8 chapters, there are 5 which are the key priorities, and 3 which are about governance. So it is about accessibility, which is perceived as an enabler of rights, autonomy, and equality. There is about full entitlement to enjoying EU rights. There is a chapter on decent quality of life and living independently, about equal participation and non-discrimination, and about the promoting of rights of persons with disabilities globally, because while situation in the EU is far from perfect, there are many places around the world which do worse. And then the communication goes into ideas how to deliver the strategy efficiently, about leading by example for the Commission itself, and about awareness, governance, and measuring progress, which is quite important, because any strategy is only as good as its implementation. This is accompanied by altogether 57 Commission actions, 7 flagship initiatives, and 23 issues where the Commission makes a call on the member states, because basically most of the things which are mentioned in the strategy fall into national or sub-national regional competences. And then there is an ambition to tackle the gaps in social protection for persons with disabilities, because there is a clear risk of higher risk among people with disabilities as regards the risk of poverty or social exclusion. More than, well, exactly 10 percentage point difference between this risk among people who do not have any disability and persons who do have a disability. So almost 1/3 of persons with disabilities are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. So the Commission will launch a study and guidance to support member states in further reforms of social protection for persons with disabilities. And in the area of education, where we clearly see that there are big challenges which are shown, or which manifest themselves by the higher incidence of early school, of early leaving from education and training among young people with disabilities than among young people without disabilities. Here the difference is more than a double. So with less than 10% of people without disabilities leaving school early, more than 20% of young people with disabilities are early school leavers. So evidently something needs to be made in this area to reduce the incidence of early school leaving. and also to enable more people with disabilities to participate in tertiary education, because now we also see a significant gap, while in the non-disability population, 43.8% are attending tertiary education, less than 30% among people with disabilities. Then Commission, well, to address those challenges, the Commission plans to support the member states to further develop their teacher education, addressing shortages of teachers in and competences of all education professionals. Commission calls on the member states to support the development of inclusive schools and advance and support learning in inclusive mainstream settings. Then disability, children with disability are one of the focus groups of the European Child Guarantee, which is principally an instrument to break the cycle of disadvantage. So it is targeted at children who are at risk of poverty or social exclusion, and consists of a number of services which should be provided for free, or if not for free, then in effective manner to those children, so that they are not socially excluded. In the preparatory action for child guarantee, children with disabilities were investigated as one of the as one of the possible target groups. Eventually, the European Child Guarantee adopted a very wide approach. So all children at risk of poverty or social exclusion are going to be covered by it. And within these groups, member states should take into account specific disadvantages experienced, among others, by children with a disability. Also, the recommendation calls on the member states to adapt facilities and education materials of early childhood education and care, and of educational establishments to the needs of children with disability, using inclusive teaching and learning methods. For this purpose, ensure the qualified teachers and other educational professionals are available, such as psychologists, speech therapists, rehabilitators, or teaching assistants. End of quote. Then the COVID pandemic has made the need for child guarantee even more urgent than it used to be when we started our work, because this the preparatory action started in 2018. Then the European Child Guarantee became a part of the political guidelines by President von der Leyen in autumn of 2019, and then the pandemic came. So everything we had in mind turned out to be needed much more quicker. So this means that we want the member states to develop the national action plans on implementation of the European Child Guarantee within 6 months after adoption of Child Guarantee recommendation by the Council. I forgot to tell you that there is a significant difference in terms of the instrument between the strategy and the rights of persons with disabilities and the European Child Guarantee, because the European Child Guarantee is a Commission proposal for a Council recommendation. So this is something which Commission presented at the end of March this year, and which is currently discussed in the Council between the member states. The Portuguese presidency and has a strong ambition to have this recommendation adopted before the summer break, so within basically 7 weeks. If the recommendation is adopted in the form that was proposed by the Commission, the member states will be invited to guarantee free and effective access to for children in need to early childhood education and care, to education and school-based activities, at least one healthy meal each school day, and to health care, including vaccinations. Effective access is to be guaranteed to healthy nutrition, more in general, and to adequate housing. This is very ambitious, not only because those 4 services are going to be, should be delivered for free to a significant group of children. In some member states, the incidence of poverty or social exclusion is above 30%, so more than 1 in 3 children should benefit in those member states. But also because effective access is defined as a situation in which services are readily available, accessible, they're of good quality, they're provided in a timely manner, and it is also as a situation where the potential users are aware of their existence and as well as entitlements to use them. So with this level of ambition, we know it's not going to happen quickly. Therefore, the action plans by the member states should cover the period until the year 2030. But we believe that the member states should start implementing quickly, and that's why we want to receive those action plans already within 6 months after adoption of the recommendation by the Council. Then there will be...
Stefan, I would like to, can you wrap up in 1 minute? Because there are some questions already for you in the chat that I would like you to answer.
Yes, so wrapping up, there is also quite a strong monitoring procedure foreseen in the proposed recommendation within based drawing from the European semester, but also developing more specific monitoring mechanism with the Social Protection Committee. So I think I can stop here and take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this good news from Europe that you are working so hard on the child guarantee. It's very promising, and I'm also very glad that that also Europe wants to learn some lessons from the COVID pandemic. That's really good news. If we go to the chat, there is a first question to Stefan from Austria. Austria uses EU structural funds for segregating institutions, for instance, by renovating a special school with boarding facilities in Tyrol. Question is, what is the EU Commission doing to stop this practice in Austria and other EU member states, as we also have read some sad news from Wallonia, that's the French-speaking part of Belgium. So there are some comments. Please, Stefan, can you answer this? What is the role of the EU Commission to stop these practices?
Well, generally the role of Commission is, at least in the social policies area, is to persuade and to advise. There is even when the European funds are used, they also are used in a consensual manner, so it needs to be negotiated between the member states and the Commission. And also now during the the discussions about the recommendation in the council, there are voices which are not very enthusiastic about the Commission's ambition to, for example, deinstitutionalize, so reduce the number of residential institutions for children, because some member states are saying that this might be necessary. So even though Commission is fully on deinstitutionalization, then if the recommendation is to be adopted by the Council, the member states discuss between themselves how to approach this issue, and we cannot be sure about the outcome. This is not directly answer to the question, but it shows that we need to be very persuasive and try to convince the member states to change their practices. So more of a carrot than of a stick. And among those, this way of convincing, there are best practice exchanges and peer reviews, which allow for learning from others' experience. Quite often it is so that knowing that something could be introduced in another member state provides a good opportunity to change practices in the member states that I might learn from it. I didn't know about the Austrian case. I can promise to share it with colleagues who work in the funds unit dealing with Austria, and I would stop answering this question here because I don't want to intrude in their area of competence. So, and as to Wallonia, let me scroll. Yeah, well, I don't get quite the question in the Walloon
There
case.
if I may, there's a big difference between education policy in Belgium. We have the Flemish-speaking part in the north, and we have the French-speaking part in the south. And education policy is different. And yeah, what Camila writes, that inclusion is not. It's not so keen, but please, Camila, if you can reformulate your question, please do so in the chat. But there is a difference in approach to inclusive education between these two parts.
Maybe even, Camila, if you're happy, we can promote you to speaker and you can maybe ask a question like that.
No.
Okay, I understand it is a comment and quite useful. Quite useful to know. Yes, it is generally also an issue that the governance levels responsible for education vary across the member states. So when we propose something which should apply to all member states, from Portugal to Finland, from Cyprus to Ireland, the first reaction often is that, well, it is not the way it is done in this country. So we need to be very elastic in policy making and in advising. So.
Okay, thank you very much. We also read that this was a picture to share and not really a question to you. Thank you for that. Okay, does anybody else has a question here? Luc Zelderlo, please.
Thank you, Annemie. And Stefan, I would like to thank you as well for your contribution to this debate here. Of course, we know that the Commission has very limited competences in the area of education. Education is national, or in most countries even a regional competence, so it's not so easy for the Commission to steer things there. Nevertheless, I think the Commission has a role to play. And I must say that both the child guarantee, which is on the table, and also the European Disability Rights Strategy, both documents are very positive and indeed will bring a change, I think, also at grassroots level. But of course, we need the buy-in of the member state level. And that is one of the things that they are discussing in Porto today and tomorrow. But my question to you, Stefan, is we know, and some of the speakers already brought it up, that there is a learning delay, especially for children with intellectual disabilities, children with learning difficulties. There's a learning delay due to Corona and the COVID-19 crisis. On the other hand, we see that member states are developing now the recovery and resilience plans. The Commission, the European institutions make available a massive amount of money to facilitate recovery. And what we see is that in these recovery plans, social is not very prominently present, and especially also education for those that lag behind a bit due to this Corona, it is not present in the recovery plans. So my question to you is, what can the Commission do to make sure that for those children whose education delay might have an echo across their future life in a very negative way, exclude them from the labor market and so and so, my question to you is, what can the Commission do to make sure that educational needs, extra support that is needed, it comes a bit higher on the agenda in these recovery plans? The money is there. It is about routing it to the right direction. So, Stefan, if you could share some ideas on that with us. Thank you very much.
Well, making the link during the negotiations in the Council, that at the same time when the member states are declaring massive support, because actually no one is objecting the idea itself of the child guarantee. There are some discussions about the details of it, that if there is so much of a political support, and if last December 24 ministers called for a quick adoption, quick preparation and quick adoption of the child guarantee, then they should be consistent in also when drafting their recovery plans. And then, as I mentioned, even before the crisis and before the recovery facility, the child poverty and social exclusion were big topics in the European semester, sometimes not directly, but because it is a very complex issue, and not always the recommendation which was meant to alleviate or improve the situation as regards child poverty included the word child poverty itself. But the recovery facility will be, the implementation will be monitored, and it will be monitored in a similar way with similar measures as in the European semester, so through recommendations, country-specific recommendations where needed. I see. Okay, I also see the comment about UK. Sorry that it's not the in the EU or Commission remit to remark on this anymore. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? I'm reading the chat. I read a lot of interesting comments. One new message. No other questions. Then I would like to conclude this panel, this first panel of our conference. Yeah, it was, for me, it was a very interesting contributions from different points of view. What I learned from the World Bank is that they have a global view, that they really want to fight poverty all over the world and guarantee access to inclusive education also all over the world. That's a very important target, and it's very good that it's a world problem that is tackled. We have learned a lot from our colleagues from Portugal, Germany, and Czechia. There are many differences in inclusive educations, many differences among member states of the European Commission, but also within a country. Carmen talked about the differences between the north and the south of Germany, but in the chat we also learned about the differences between the north and the south of Belgium. So in many different European countries, there is also different chances to have inclusive education. We all are infected by COVID. We all have the impact of the COVID pandemic, and we all want to learn about it. Also the European Commission, that's also very good to hear. Stefan told us that in a couple of months, we will have a wrap up from the lessons learned by the COVID pandemic. And let's hope for the future that we can build on inclusive education, and that we have learned a lot for the families, for the children, for the teachers, about digitalization, about distance, and building bridges among all partners in inclusive education. So thank you very much to all panelists. Thank you to the audience to have these interesting comments and questions. And now it's time for coffee. But before we have this coffee break, it's my duty to announce that at 12 o'clock, parallel workshops start, and that we will close today at 1 o'clock. Rachel, I don't know if you have some practicalities about the workshops, please.
Yeah, I can share some more information on the workshops. Thank you very much for your great moderation. Thank you very much to all the speakers. It's been a great morning, but as Annemie said, it's not over yet. So we have a 30-minute coffee break now, but after that, we will be back for our first rounds of workshops at 12 o'clock Brussels time. So we'll have a workshop from inclusive education to inclusive employment opportunities, a workshop on working with early intervention services to build inclusive education, and that workshop will have Portuguese interpretation, a workshop on the role of arts and culture in inclusive education, a fourth workshop on using technology to promote participation for students with disabilities, that will have Spanish interpretation, and a fifth workshop, inclusion on the move, inclusive post-secondary education for students with intellectual disabilities in Europe. You can find the links for all of these workshops in the conference agenda. So if you go to our conference platform, espdconferences.com, you click on the agenda, you should be able to find the workshops for the first day, and you can find the links to those workshops. In the meantime, we encourage you to check out our platform, see who's attending and give them a call and connect with your colleagues. And as we move into the break, throughout this conference, we're hoping that we can take a look at what inclusive education means for learners and families in different countries across Europe. We've already begun to do that, but we will leave you with a video from one of our members in Georgia, Society Veliki, and I'll just let my colleague play that, and enjoy your coffee break, and we will see you at 12 o'clock.
მე ვარ მარი, 29 წლის, გაბრიელის დედა. ჩემი შვილის დიაგნოზია ცერებრალური დამბლა. რთულია სტერეოტიპებით სავსე სამყაროში ცხოვრება და თავის დამკვიდრება. მაშინ, როდესაც მუდმივად გვიწევს ბრძოლა ინკლუზიურ გარემოს შექმნასთან დაკავშირებით. ასევე არ არის მარტივი სპეციალური საგანმანათლებლო საჭიროების მქონე ბავშვის მშობლობაც. როდესაც ხშირ შემთხვევაში მარტო ხარ იმ გამოწვევების წინაშე, რასაც ცხოვრება გთავაზობს. ჩემი შვილი საბავშვო ბაღის აღსაზრდელია. ამ შემთხვევაში ვფიქრობ, რომ გაგვიმართლა, რადგან არ გაგვჭირვებია ბაღში ჩართვა და გაბრიელს მოსწონს ის პერიოდი, რასაც იქ ატარებს. თუმცა ხშირია შემთხვევები, როდესაც მშობლები დიდ სირთულეებს აწყდებიან სკოლამდელი აღზრდის დაწესებულებაში. ვერ ახერხებენ მათი შვილების მიყვანას ბაღში, რადგან სპეციალისტების ნაკლებობის გამო არსებობს საფრთხე, რომ მათი შვილებისათვის ინკლუზიური ადაპტირებული გარემო იქ ვერ შეიქმნება. სწორედ ამიტომ ჩნდება ინკლუზიური განათლების ხელმისაწვდომობის პრობლემაც. თუ ბავშვი სკოლამდელი აღზრდის დაწესებულებიდან არ იღებს ინკლუზიურ განათლებას, რთულია მისი მომზადება სასკოლო ასაკისათვის, სადაც ხშირ შემთხვევაში ბევრად მეტი პრობლემა წარმოიქმნება ხოლმე. როდესაც ინკლუზიურ განათლებაზე ვსაუბრობთ, არ შემიძლია არ აღვნიშნო საბავშვო გასართობის კვლევები, რომლებიც არ არის ადაპტირებული და ერთნაირად მორგებული ყველა ბავშვის საჭიროებას. ჩვენი შვილებისათვის მნიშვნელოვანია საქანელები და მის ირგვლივ არსებული ტერიტორია იყოს დარბილებული და დაცული, რადგან ბავშვმა დამოუკიდებლად მშობლის დახმარების გარეშე შეძლოს იქ თამაში. შემიძლია ვთქვა, რომ ძალიან გაგვიმართლა, როდესაც საზოგადოება ბილიკის ადრეული განვითარების პროგრამის შესახებ გავიგე ინფორმაცია. ჩემი შვილი მესამე წელია ჩართულია აღნიშნულ პროგრამაში. ნაბიჯ-ნაბიჯ ვსწავლობთ ყველაფერს, ქცევის წესებს, თანატოლებთან და უფროსებთან კომუნიკაციას. გაბრიელი ასევე ჩართულია მცირე ჯგუფის მუშაობაში, სადაც მულტიდისციპლინარული გუნდი ერთად გეგმავს სხვადასხვა აქტივობებს. ყველაზე სასიხარულო ფაქტი ჩემთვის ის არის, რომ ჩემმა შვილმა შეიძინა თამაშის უნარები საზოგადოება ბილიკის ბავშვთა და მოზარდთა განვითარების ცენტრში. ხშირად ვფიქრობ, როგორი გარემო იქნება საუკეთესო ჩემი შვილისათვის, რაც ხელს შეუწყობს მის განვითარებას და საზოგადოებრივ ცხოვრებაში მის ჩართულობას. პირველ რიგში მინდა, რომ ადამიანები გათავისუფლდნენ სტერეოტიპული აზროვნებისგან. შესაბამისად, ჰქონდეთ მეტი ინფორმაცია 0-7 წლამდე შეფერხების მქონე ბავშვების შესახებ. ამისათვის მნიშვნელოვანია ხშირად განხორციელდეს ცნობიერების ასამაღლებლად კამპანიები. მომზადდეს პატარა ვიდეო რგოლები, რითიც გაიზრდება საზოგადოების ცნობიერება და მიმღებლობა. ხალხს არ ექნება შეცოდების მომენტი და იფიქრებენ მხოლოდ იმაზე, თუ როგორ აგრძნობინონ ჩემ შვილს თავი საზოგადოების სრულფასოვან წევრად. რათა მან თავისუფლად შეძლოს კომუნიკაცია, თამაში თანატოლებთან ერთად, რათა სამომავლოდ მოემზადოს სასკოლო ასაკისათვის. თუ მიმდინარე სოციალურ და კულტურულ პროცესებში აქტიური მონაწილეობით თვით რეალიზების საშუალება მიეცემათ მოზარდებს, მოხდება მათი თვითშეფასებას ზრდის ხელშეწყობა, რაც ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანია. ყველა სპეციალური საგანმანათლებლო საჭიროების მქონე მოზარდებისათვის კი ადაპტირებული გარემოს შექმნა სასიცოცხლოდ მნიშვნელოვანია, სადაც ყველა ბავშვის უფლება თანაბრად იქნება დაცული. ყველა ბავშვს აქვს უფლება ისწავლოს და განვითარდეს სკოლამდელ დაწესებულებასა და სასკოლო გარემოში. ყველა ბავშვს აქვს უფლება მიიღოს ხარისხიანი განათლება.
Thank you very much to our members for providing that video. Enjoy your coffee break and we'll see you back at 12 o'clock.